The records of the High Synod were absolute. For 10,000 cycles, the Valeri Empire had expanded across the spiral arm, a tide of silver ships and golden armor that washed over civilizations like the inevitable rising of a sun. To the Valeri, the galaxy was a garden to be pruned, a chaotic expanse to be ordered. Species were categorized, indexed, and integrated. Those who bent the knee were elevated to servitude. Those who resisted were excised, their histories deleted, their worlds repurposed. The Synod did not know fear. They did not know doubt. They understood only the binary of compliance and correction. And then their long-range augers turned toward the Orion Spur, toward a yellow dwarf star that burned with a mediocre, steady light in the desolate dark of the unconquered fringes. They found Sol. They found Earth. And in their supreme arrogance, the Valeri High Council saw only another weed to be plucked. The initial assessment was dismissive. The species inhabiting the third rock was fractured, tribal, and dangerously aggressive toward its own kind. They had barely mastered the atom. Their faster-than-light capabilities were theoretical, clumsy stutter steps that barely carried them to their own moons. Their communications were a cacophony of unencrypted radio waves, screaming their existence into the void with the desperation of a drowning child. To High Commander Kael'thas, the architect of a dozen subjugations, humanity was not a threat. It was a resource extraction project. The plan was standard. The protocol of silence followed by the decree of compliance. The Valeri fleet, a shimmering armada of 3,000 vessels, dropped out of warp space just beyond the orbit of Jupiter. The gas giant hung heavy and silent, a mute witness to the arrival of gods. Kael'thas stood upon the bridge of the voice of order, his eyes scanning the holographic representation of the system. He expected panic. He expected the crude signals of the humans to spike in terror. He expected their primitive leaders to beg for mercy or posture with empty threats. But as the Valeri fleet moved inward, passing the asteroid belt, there was no panic. There was no chaotic scattering of ships. The radio waves that had been screaming from Earth for a century simply stopped. The chatter ceased. The television signals, the digital pulses, the constant noise of a billion voices talking over one another, it was all cut as if by a single switch. The Sol system fell into a silence so profound it unnerved the bridge crew. Kael'thas dismissed their unease. Silence, he reasoned, was the first stage of submission. They were hiding. They were cowering. It was the natural reaction of prey when the predator's shadow fell across the nest. The Valeri broadcast the decree. It was a simple message, translated into every major Terran language, looped on every frequency. Disarm, submit, serve. Resistance is extinction. They gave Earth one rotation to respond. The hours ticked by. The massive alien dreadnoughts drifted closer, their shadows falling across the lunar surface. Still nothing. No shuttle launched to offer surrender. No missiles launched in defiance. Just the cold, hard static of a dead world. Kael'thas grew impatient. He ordered a kinetic strike on a minor population center, a city called Anchorage. It was a warning shot, a precise rod of tungsten dropped from orbit to shatter a city and prove the reality of their power. The rod fell. The impact flared white-hot, a new star born on the northern crust. The seismic shockwaves were registered by the Valeri sensors, and still Earth said nothing. "They are paralyzed by fear," Kael'thas announced to his subordinates. "Begin the landings, secure the industrial centers. Call the leadership." The drop ships descending like a plague of locusts into the atmosphere. They expected disorganized militias. They expected weeping civilians. What they found was emptiness. The great cities of Earth were deserted. New York, Tokyo, London, Shanghai, ghost towns. The streets were clear. The buildings stood silent. It was as if the entire population had evaporated into the mist. The Valeri troops moved through the concrete canyons, their golden armor gleaming under the yellow sun, confused by the lack of sport. Where were the slaves? Where were the workers? It wasn't until the 7th Legion entered the sublevels of the European sector that the silence was broken. It didn't start with a roar. It started with a click, a single mechanical click that echoed through the empty metro tunnels beneath Paris. Then came the flash. The entire city block above them vaporized, not from orbital bombardment, but from beneath. The humans had rigged their own cities. They had turned their homes into claymore mines. As the dust settled and the screams of the dying Valeri soldiers filled the tactical comms, the signal returned. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a single, low-frequency audio file broadcast on an open channel to the entire fleet. It was the sound of a shovel hitting dirt, rhythmically, digging. And then a voice, synthetic and cold, spoke 4 words, "Welcome to the grave." The war that followed was not the clean, surgical conquest Cael'thas had promised the Synod. It was a descent into madness. The humans had not fled. They had gone underground. They had spent the last 50 years, ever since they first detected the faint gravimetric ripples of the Valeri expansion, preparing not to win, but to make the enemy bleed. They knew they could not match the Valeri in space, so they invited them down to the mud. They turned their planet into a meat grinder. Every building was a bunker. Every sewer was a supply line. Every mountain range was a fortress honeycombed with railguns that fired silent, magnetically accelerated slugs that punched through energy shields as if they were paper. The Valeri psychology was built on dominance and hierarchy. If you killed the leader, the army rooted. If you destroyed the capital, the nation fell. But humanity had no center. They operated in autonomous cells, fighting with a ferocity that defied logic. A Valeri platoon would corner a human unit, offering them life in exchange for surrender. The humans would respond by detonating their own vests, taking the hallway and everyone in it with them. They fought with broken limbs. They fought with improvised weapons. They fought when they were starving, when they were blinded, when they were the last soul left alive in a burning ruin. Cael'thas watched the casualty reports climb. 10,000 dead, 50,000, 100,000. The Valeri ground forces, the finest warriors in the galaxy, were breaking, not from lack of skill, but from psychological trauma. They were fighting ghosts who laughed at death. "Why do they not submit?" Cael'thas screamed at his xenobiologists. "We have burned their fields, we have shattered their moon, we have turned their oceans to steam. Logic dictates surrender." The head xenobiologist, a frail creature named Xylos, trembled as he projected a hologram of a human brain. "High Commander," Xylos whispered, "we made a mistake. We classified them as a Class 3 civilized species. We assumed their primary drive was survival. It is not." Cael'thas stared at the image. "Explain." "Their primary drive is spite, Commander. They possess a psychological trait we have no word for. It is the ability to endure infinite suffering solely to deny the enemy a victory. They will burn their own world to ash if it means you choke on the smoke. They do not care if they live, as long as we die." Cael'thas felt a chill that the vacuum of space could not match. He ordered the fleet to pull back to high orbit. He would glass the planet. He would scour the surface until it was nothing but molten glass. No more ground war, total sterilization. The voice of order began to charge its primary ventral cannon, a weapon capable of cracking tectonic plates. The energy buildup was immense, lighting up the dark side of Earth with a violet hue. "Let this be the end," Cael'thas muttered. But as the weapon reached critical charge, the sensors screamed. Multiple slip-space ruptures were detected. Not from outside the system, from inside. From the other side of the sun, from the debris of the asteroid belt, from the shadow of Neptune. The humans had not just been digging holes in the ground, they had been building in the dark. For decades, disguised as mining haulers and orbital debris, humanity had constructed a fleet. It was not a fleet of elegance. The ships were ugly, blocky things, scarred welding seams visible, engines exposed, hulls painted in non-reflective void black. They looked like flying bricks wrapped in guns. They had no shields, they had no gravity drives, they were propelled by pulsed nuclear detonations and rage, and there were thousands of them. The Mosquito Fleet, they called it. Tiny, agile, suicidal. They didn't engage the Valeri ships in a line of battle. They swarmed. They accelerated to percentages of light speed that crushed the pilots inside, turning the ships themselves into kinetic missiles. They slammed into the golden dreadnoughts, piercing the hulls through sheer momentum. Cael'thas watched in horror as his armada was picked apart by these metal piranhas. The Valeri targeting computers couldn't track them. There were too many, moving too fast, with too little regard for self-preservation. A human cruiser, the Indomitable, barely holding together, rammed the starboard flank of Cael'thas's flagship. It didn't fire weapons. It simply engaged its thrusters and pushed. It pushed the massive Valkyrie ship out of alignment, ruining the firing solution for the planet-killer weapon. Then came the heavy hitters. Rising from the clouds of Jupiter, where they had been hidden deep within the pressure storms, came the dreadnoughts. These were not ships, they were mountains of steel and hatred. The Terra, the Mars, the Vengeance. They carried railguns the size of skyscrapers. The first volley from the Terra didn't just hit a Valkyrie destroyer, it obliterated it, turning matter into mist in a fraction of a second. The physics of the human weapons were crude, brutal, and effective. They didn't use elegant energy beams. They threw solid slugs of depleted uranium at relativistic speeds. Sir Isaac Newton was the deadliest son of a bitch in space, and the humans were his prophets. Cael'thas tried to rally his fleet. Form up, focus fire on the capital ships. But his captains were panicking. They were fighting a species that weaponized physics and psychology. The comms were filled with the screams of Valkyrie crews being boarded. The humans didn't use blasters in close quarters. They used shotguns, axes, and pressurized flamethrowers. They fought like demons released from a cage. The bridge of the Voice of Order shook violently as the Indomitable detonated its fusion core against their hull. The shields failed. The atmosphere vented. Cael'thas held onto his command console, watching the red lights of failure bloom across his empire's pride. A transmission broke through the chaos. It overrode the Valkyrie encryption with brute force hacking. The face of a human appeared on the main screen. He was old, scarred, one eye replaced by a crude cybernetic optic. He wore a uniform that was stained and torn. Admiral Hackett. He didn't shout, he didn't gloat. He looked at Cael'thas with the tired eyes of a man who had buried his children and had nothing left to lose but his ammunition. "You came to our home," Hackett said, his voice gravel and steel. "You thought silence was weakness. You thought peace was submission. You forgot that the most dangerous thing in the universe is a predator that has learned to be quiet." Cael'thas snarled, "You are insects. We are the Valkyrie. We own the stars." Hackett cracked a dry, humorless smile. "You own the stars, now you're just trespassing." The human admiral leaned forward. "We don't want your empire, we don't want your technology, we just want you gone. And to ensure you don't come back, we're going to follow you home." The transmission cut. Cael'thas's eyes widened. Follow them home? It was impossible. The coordinates to the Valkyrie homeworld were the most guarded secret in the galaxy. But then he saw it. The Valkyrie navigation computer was active. Someone was downloading the flight logs, the borders. The humans hadn't just been killing, they had been stealing data. "Purge the database," Cael'thas screamed. "Self-destruct the ship." But it was too late. The Terra fired its main battery. The bridge of the Voice of Order was engulfed in blinding light. The last thing Cael'thas saw was the blue marble of Earth, beautiful and terrible, hanging in the void like an unblinking eye. The battle for Sol lasted 3 days. When it was over, the debris field of the Valkyrie fleet formed a new ring around Earth. 3,000 ships entered, none left, but the humans did not stop to celebrate. They did not stop to mourn. The factories on Mars, on the Moon, on the scorched surface of Earth kicked into overdrive. They cannibalized the alien wrecks. They reverse-engineered the warp drives. They adapted the energy shields. They took the golden armor of their oppressors and melted it down to make bullets. Humanity had been woken up. The sleeper had awakened, and it was angry. 6 months later, the skies above the Valkyrie homeworld, Prime, turned dark. The citizens of the Empire looked up, expecting the return of their glorious fleet. Instead, they saw black shapes blocking out the stars, ugly, blocky, scarred ships. Thousands of them. The human expeditionary force had arrived. They didn't broadcast a decree of compliance. They didn't ask for surrender. They simply opened fire. It was not a war of conquest. Humanity had no desire to rule over the Valkyrie. It was a punitive expedition. A lesson written in fire across the surface of a world that had forgotten what fear felt like. The siege of Prime was brutal. The humans fought with the same desperate ferocity on the enemy's soil as they had on their own. They dropped shock troopers into the Senate chambers. They parked destroyers in the atmosphere and rained kinetic slugs on the military academies. The Valkyrie, soft from millennia of easy victories, crumbled. Their perfect society, built on the backs of slaves, collapsed under the weight of total war. The humans broke the chains of 1,000 subject species. They handed weapons to the conquered and said, "Finish it." In the ruins of the High Synod's palace, the last surviving elder looked up at the human soldier standing over him. The human was encased in power armor scavenged from Valeri tech, painted a matte black with a white skull stenciled on the faceplate. The elder gasped, purple blood bubbling from his lips. "Why?" he wheezed. "We offered you order. We offered you purpose." The human soldier removed his helmet. He was young, barely 20, but his eyes were ancient. "You offered us a cage," the soldier said, "and you kicked the dog. You should have let us sleep." The soldier raised his rifle. The galaxy watched. For 10,000 years, the story of the universe had been written by the Valeri. Now the ink was blood and the pen was in human hands. The Valeri Empire was not just defeated, it was dismantled. Its name was struck from the star charts. Its monuments were toppled. In its place, a new reputation spread through the subspace channels. A warning whispered in the cantinas of 100 worlds. A new map was drawn, and around the sector containing Sol, there was a large, blank space marked with a single designation. "Here there be dragons." The other galactic powers, the ancient mercantile guilds, the warrior castes of the Outer Rim, they all looked at the smoking ruins of the Valeri and learned a singular, terrifying lesson. They learned that there is a species on the edge of the spiral arm that does not play by the rules of civilized warfare. A species that will weaponize its own suffering. A species that views impossible odds not as a deterrent, but as a dare. They learned that if you push humanity, you do not get a fight. You get a funeral. And so the galaxy left Sol alone. The silence returned to the yellow dwarf star, but this time it was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of a loaded gun waiting for a reason to go off. Generations passed. Humanity rebuilt. They expanded but cautiously. They did not conquer, they fortified. They built watchtowers in the void. They created a perimeter of listening posts that spanned light years. Every child born on Earth, on Mars, on the new colonies of Alpha Centauri, was taught the history. They were taught about the day of silence. They were taught that the stars are beautiful, but they are also full of teeth. And they were taught that humanity must always be the sharper set of jaws. In the deep archives of the Galactic Council, a new entry was added to the Codex of Sentient Life. Under the entry for Homo sapiens, there were no statistics about trade or culture. There was only a brief note, penned by a trembling hand of an observer who had witnessed the fall of the Valeri. The note read, "Do not disturb. They are the indomitable. They are the ones who refuse to die. If you meet them, pray they are friendly. If you anger them, pray for a quick death. For they are the children of Terra and they have no concept of surrender." And far away, on the bridge of the UCS, never again, a descendant of Admiral Hackett looked out at the star field. The sensors pinged. A new contact, unidentified, approaching fast. The crew looked to the captain. There was no fear in their eyes, only a cold, professional readiness. The captain smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that bared teeth. "Shields up," she ordered. "Charge the main rails. Let's see if they want to talk or if they want to learn a lesson." The engines hummed, the weapons primed. The indomitable will of humanity was ready once more. The galaxy held its breath. The lesson was simple, and it would be taught as many times as necessary. We are not trapped in here with you. You are trapped in here with us.